Have you ever felt like something was deeply wrong, but still convinced yourself it was normal? As if the quiet ache in your chest, the tightness in your throat, was just your imagination, or worse, your fault. How many times have you told yourself, this is just how love feels, even as your soul whispered, no, it's not. Somewhere along the way, you learned to silence your instincts in the name of peace, to overlook the discomfort, to rewrite your boundaries as expectations too high, and to call the absence of cruelty love. Carl Jung believed that we become what we pretend to be, and the more you pretend you're okay, the more the real you begins to disappear. This is not a video about judgment. It's a soft but honest invitation to see, truly see, what you've been carrying. Not just the pain others caused you, but the weight of your own tolerance. Because emotional suffering doesn't always begin with what happened to you. It often begins with what you've allowed to keep happening, not out of weakness, but out of a quiet, learned fear that says, if I speak up, I'll lose them. But Jung didn't teach us to cling. He taught us to wake up, to step into the underworld of the psyche, into the shadow, and reclaim the parts of ourselves we left behind in the name of survival. This video is a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They don't blame either. They simply show you what's been there all along. So today, we reflect on 10 truths Carl Jung would never ask you to tolerate. These are not rules. They are recognitions, moments of clarity for the soul that has been dimmed too long. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, hidden your needs to feel loved, or told yourself, maybe I'm just too sensitive, this message is for you. If it resonates with your journey, please consider subscribing. Not just for the content, but to remind yourself, gently, that there's a place where your depth isn't too much. It's exactly enough. Now, let's begin. Truth number 1. When love feels like guilt. It often starts subtly. You ask for space. They sigh. You express a need. And suddenly, you're too much. Before you know it, you begin rewriting your own instincts to keep the peace. You tell yourself, they're just having a bad day. They didn't mean it. This is just how they show they care. But behind these justifications is quiet erosion. Carl Jung once said, the soul becomes ill when it is denied its truth. And emotional manipulation, especially when wrapped in the language of love, is one of the most poisonous forms of denial. It teaches you to distrust your own needs, to flinch at your own voice, to believe that your boundaries are burdens, not birthrights. And because it comes not with screams, but with sighs, not with fists, but with guilt trips, you begin to question your own clarity. Was I being selfish? Am I the problem? But here's the truth that Jung would want you to remember. Love that demands your silence is not love. It's control wearing a kind face. Because real connection does not punish your needs, it honors them. Real love holds space for your voice to rise, not just your presence to endure. And so, when you find yourself constantly explaining your hurt, negotiating your value, or apologizing for simply having emotions, you are not being loved. You are being slowly undone. Jung taught us that healing begins when the unconscious becomes conscious. And nothing brings clarity faster than naming what hurts. So ask yourself, is this love healing me or hollowing me out? Because the soul always knows, even when the ego is still making excuses. Now, let's turn to the second mirror. Truth number 2, the sharp tongue of honesty. Have you ever been cut by words dressed as truth? It's just how I am. I'm being honest. You're too sensitive. The sentence arrives like a slap wrapped in silk. And yet, you say nothing, because the world has taught you to value truth over tenderness, even when that truth leaves you bleeding. Carl Jung understood that cruelty masquerading as honesty is not truth. It's domination. He once said that the personality does not grow through erosion, but through affirmation. Yet, how many times have you shrunk yourself after one of these honest talks? How many dreams have you silenced? How much confidence have you swallowed? You begin to confuse sharpness with sincerity, and numbness with maturity. You learn to smile while bleeding, to nod while aching, to take it well because you don't want to seem dramatic. But here's the uncomfortable clarity Jung whispers through the fog. There is no virtue in tolerating verbal violence, no wisdom in accepting contempt as correction. When someone's honesty leaves you smaller every time, they are not helping you grow. They are making themselves feel tall. Real honesty is not a dagger. It's a mirror. It reflects without slicing. It invites you to see more, not to become less. So the next time someone wounds you and calls it just being real, ask yourself, is this truth, or is this control? Is this about connection or compliance? Because the soul knows the difference, and it never forgets who made it feel unsafe in the name of love. Let's keep walking. The third truth waits, quieter, but just as fierce. Truth number 3. Control disguised as protection. Have you ever felt your world shrinking in the name of someone else's care? You don't need to go out tonight. I'm just worried about you. I know what's best for us. It sounds gentle, loving, almost noble. But behind those sweet syllables is a quiet grip, a tightening around your freedom, your choices, your very sense of self. Jung warned us that the shadow rarely shows up as a monster. It comes as a guardian, a protector, a voice whispering, I only do this because I love you. But love does not restrict. Love does not cage. Love does not edit your identity to ease someone else's anxiety. Control dressed as protection is still control, and it's dangerous because you won't notice it at first. It starts small, a suggestion, a hesitation, a subtle shaping of your behavior to avoid their discomfort. Then slowly, you stop doing things you love. You question your instincts. You ask for permission where you once moved freely. And eventually, you look in the mirror and ask, when did I start disappearing? Carl Jung believed that we lose ourselves not through grand betrayals, but through small, repeated denials of the soul. When someone's fear dictates your freedom, it is not devotion, it is domination by disguise. So ask yourself, are they protecting you or possessing you? Are they loving who you are or molding who they need you to be? The soul cannot breathe in captivity, even when the cage is gold and the lock is affection. It's time to exhale. And as we take that breath, we step into the fourth truth, one that hides behind confusion, gaslight, and the theft of your very sense of reality. Shall we keep going? Truth number 4. Gaslighting, the assault on your inner compass. Have you ever walked away from a conversation unsure if you were misunderstood or if you were losing your mind? That quiet doubt, that gnawing question. Was I overreacting? Did I make that up? Maybe it really is my fault. This is not conflict. This is psychological erosion. And Carl Jung saw it clearly. Gaslighting is not a disagreement. It is a dismantling of the soul's compass. One manipulation at a time, your truth is rewritten. Your memories are revised. Your instincts, once sharp and radiant, are dulled by repetition. You're too sensitive. That's not what happened. Why do you always twist things? These are not comments. They are scalpel cuts, small enough to seem insignificant, precise enough to sever trust in yourself. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. But if every mirror in your life has been warped by someone else's version of the truth, how can you see yourself at all?" This is the cruelty of gaslighting. It doesn't just make you doubt someone else. It makes you doubt yourself. And when your inner world no longer feels safe, when your thoughts are suspect, your memories unreliable, and your feelings overblown, you start outsourcing your sanity to the very person breaking it. Jung believed that healing requires reintegrating what has been pushed into the unconscious. But how do you reclaim something when someone has convinced you it never existed? You don't need permission to trust your gut. You don't need proof to honor your perception. You don't need consensus to call an experience real. Gaslighting is not just a lie. It is an invitation to forget yourself. So remember, if you feel like you're constantly trying to prove what happened, it's not about facts, it's about power. And the way forward isn't to argue harder, it's to return to yourself. You are not crazy, you are awakening. And in that awakening, we arrive at the next truth. One where your dreams, your joy, your passions are not just dismissed. They're mocked, and your soul is told to hush. Let's step into it. Truth number 5. The dismissal of your inner world. When your soul is asked to stay silent, have you ever shared something that made your heart light up? A dream, a vision, a story from childhood, only to be met with a smirk, or worse, silence. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from showing someone your inner garden, only for them to trample through it like it was nothing but weeds. Carl Jung believed that the soul thrives in authenticity. But when your joy is mocked, when your ideas are minimized, when your enthusiasm is treated like naivety, you begin to bury the parts of yourself that once bloomed freely. It doesn't happen all at once. You stop sharing your art, then your opinions. Then even your laughter becomes quieter until silence feels safer than expression. You become a ghost inside your own life, present but no longer visible. This dismissal isn't just unkind, it's spiritual suffocation. And Jung would tell you, what you silence within will not die. It will go underground, waiting to return as frustration, depression, or chronic emptiness. Because every time you say, "It's not a big deal," about something that once made you feel alive, you're not keeping the peace. You're abandoning your essence. You begin to edit yourself so much that eventually you forget what the unedited version even sounded like. But the soul doesn't forget. It waits. For the day you will speak again, for the day you will stop apologizing for being passionate, creative, hopeful. You don't need permission to care deeply. You don't need validation to dream loudly. Jung knew that what we suppress becomes shadow, but what we honor becomes light. So let yourself be seen. Let your voice be heard, even if it shakes. Because the moment you reclaim your voice, you open the door to empathy, the bridge between souls that no one can cross if you're always shrinking. And that is where we go next, to the devastating absence of empathy and the slow death of connection it leaves behind. Truth number 6, the absence of empathy. When the heart grows cold, and you start forgetting your own, have you ever tried to explain your pain, only to feel like you were speaking a foreign language? Not because your words were unclear, but because the person listening had already decided not to hear you. That silence, that blank look, that impatient sigh after your sentence finishes, it doesn't just sting, it dissolves you. Carl Jung taught that empathy is not a luxury in a relationship. It is the very architecture of intimacy. Without it, there is no bridge between two souls, only two islands shouting across an empty sea. When someone consistently invalidates your feelings, downplays your suffering, or responds to your wounds with indifference, you don't just feel unloved, you feel unreal. Over time, you start shrinking your emotional needs. You learn not to ask for support, not to cry out loud, not to need too much. You begin to orphan your pain just to maintain a connection that no longer nurtures you. Jung warned that what we neglect within us does not disappear. It becomes the very part that sabotages our future bonds. And the tragedy? You start doing it to yourself. You downplay your own sadness. You rush past your own heartbreaks. You learn to flinch at your own vulnerability because somewhere along the way, you were taught that your pain is inconvenient. But you are not a burden. Your feelings are not excess baggage to be hidden in someone else's comfort zone. You are allowed to take up emotional space. The soul does not bloom in a climate of dismissal. It withers. Empathy is oxygen for the heart. Without it, your spirit suffocates in silence. And yet, there's something even more subtle, more insidious, that teaches you to tolerate the intolerable. It's when betrayal comes dressed in apology, when a wound is covered by words, but the knife is never put down. Let's turn to that next. Let's talk about the dangerous dance of repeated betrayal, wrapped in remorse. Truth number 7. Repeated betrayal, disguised as remorse. When I'm sorry becomes a spell to keep you silent. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream, it whispers, softens its edges with a trembling voice and says, "I didn't mean to. I was just upset. I'll change. I promise." And for a moment, you want to believe it. Because believing it is easier than facing the reality that someone you love continues to wound you. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That includes apologizing for behavior instead of changing it. There's a danger in confusing apologies with accountability, a danger in mistaking repetition for redemption. When someone betrays your trust, lies, cheats, manipulates, then seals the rupture with words instead of action, they are not healing the bond. They are managing you. And you begin to live in cycles, where pain becomes routine and forgiveness becomes a reflex. You start to believe that maybe this is what love is, a constant negotiation between your dignity and their comfort. You tell yourself, they're trying. They didn't mean it. It's not that bad. But betrayal, when repeated, is not an accident. It's a pattern, a language of behavior. Jung emphasized, the psyche remembers. Even if you convince your mind to forgive, your body keeps score. Your soul begins to flinch at closeness, afraid of the next apology that will follow the next blow. You begin to mistrust not only others, but yourself, your ability to set boundaries, to know when enough is enough. Repeated betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your compass. And without it, you drift into self-abandonment. But here's the deeper truth. You are not meant to endure hurt just because someone says sorry. Love is not built on pain management. It's built on truth, trust, and transformation. A person who truly values you won't just apologize, they will evolve. And if they don't, you must be the one who does. Because your healing can't wait for someone else's awakening. But there's another mask love wears, a quieter one. It doesn't scream. It retreats. Let's talk about what happens when someone withholds their presence not to heal, but to punish. Truth number 8. Emotional withdrawal used as punishment when silence becomes a weapon. Sometimes the loudest cruelty is the silence that follows your pain. It's not the argument, not the slammed door, not the raised voice. It's the cold distance when you needed closeness, the unanswered message when you longed for connection, the sudden vanishing of someone who once made you feel seen. Carl Jung warned us that what we do not bring into consciousness, we act out as fate. An emotional withdrawal, when used not for space but for control, is one of the most common unconscious patterns of domination. It begins subtly, a disagreement, a misstep, a boundary spoken aloud, and suddenly you're met with absence. Not peaceful space, but pointed, painful silence. No explanation, no comfort, no conversation, just emptiness posing as maturity. And you begin to question yourself. Did I say too much? Was I too needy? Should I have just stayed quiet? This is not reflection. This is punishment. Jung called this a regression into shadow, a retreat into coldness when the ego feels threatened, a way to withhold love as leverage to make you beg for warmth you already deserve. Over time, this dynamic chips away at your self-worth. You begin to associate conflict with abandonment. You stop voicing your truth to keep the peace. But peace kept through silence is not peace. It's emotional exile. They call it needing time. But real healing space is compassionate, not cold. When silence is used to hurt rather than heal, it becomes a form of control, a psychological leash. You find yourself chasing closeness, apologizing for truths that shouldn't need permission, shrinking your voice just to feel held again. But real love doesn't disappear in discomfort. It stays, it communicates, it grows. And sometimes it's not you they're punishing. It's the reflection of themselves they can't tolerate in your truth. So remember, being ignored isn't your failure. It's their fear masquerading as power. You deserve connection that doesn't vanish when things get hard, affection that isn't conditional, presence that doesn't disappear into silence. Because when love uses silence as a sword, what's cut isn't just the bond. It's your belief in your own emotional reality. But some wounds don't come from others. Some are inherited, unseen, generational. Let's go deeper, into the shadow of how you were taught to love. Truth number 9, the legacy of normalized dysfunction, when love was first learned in chaos. You didn't start here. You weren't born thinking that pain was love, that silence was safety, that walking on eggshells meant connection. These were taught, etched into your nervous system, written into your soul by hands that were likely wounded themselves. Carl Jung often spoke of the unconscious inheritance, the psychic residue passed down from generation to generation, and nowhere does this show up more clearly than in how we learn to give and receive love. If your childhood taught you that being invisible kept you safe, if you were praised for being easy and punished for expressing needs, if your emotions were too loud, too messy, too inconvenient, then somewhere along the way you learned to make yourself small, to edit your truth just to be tolerated. That wasn't love. That was survival. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So, what if your relationship patterns, your tolerance for emotional neglect, your chasing of unavailable love, what if none of it was really yours? What if it was programmed, passed down not just through behavior, but through silence, through looks that shamed, through rules never spoken but always enforced? And here's the thing. Healing doesn't begin when you forgive and forget. Healing begins when you remember and choose differently. When you stop calling emotional starvation strength, when you stop idolizing those who withheld their affection as models of maturity, when you dare to say, That wasn't love. That was conditioning. Because the truth is, what feels familiar isn't always what feels good. And your body may crave the pattern, but your soul is begging for something different. You are not here to repeat the cycles that broke you. You are here to interrupt them, to be the one who says, I don't need to earn love through silence. I don't need to perform to be seen. I don't need to prove I am worthy. You already are. But awareness alone isn't enough. You must embody that worth. In your voice, in your boundaries, in your relationships. Because once you see the root, you are no longer just reacting. You are rewriting. And there's one final truth you must hold close. A truth Jung warned us never to forget. Well, truth number 10. Emotional neglect is not neutral. It is soul erosion in disguise. You might have told yourself, they didn't mean harm. They were just busy. They had their own pain to deal with. And perhaps that's true, but emotional neglect, whether by parents, partners, or friends, does not disappear just because it wasn't loud. In fact, Jung warned us that the most damaging wounds are often the ones never spoken, the quiet absence of presence, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes, the way your stories were met with silence instead of celebration. You learned to stop reaching, to stop expecting, to stop hoping that someone would really see you, because every time you did, you were met with less than you gave, or nothing at all. And so, you became the giver, the listener, the fixer, not because you didn't need, but because needing was never safe. This is not neutrality. This is erosion of joy, of connection, of your very self. Carl Jung taught that what the psyche represses, the body remembers, and emotional neglect, left unnamed, does not vanish. It calcifies into fatigue, it shapes your attachment, it becomes the silence between your heart and your voice. But here's what you need to know now. You are not too much for asking. You are not a burden for needing. You were simply taught to normalize starvation and call it independence. But independence is not the absence of connection. It is the sovereign choice to receive only what honors your truth. So, if you find yourself in spaces where your soul is unseen, not challenged, not fought, just ignored, that is not peace. That is slow spiritual death. And no, you don't have to scream, you don't have to fight, you don't have to prove anything. You simply have to leave the rooms that shrink you, so you can find the ones that reflect you. Because your soul was not designed for exile. It was built for resonance. Jung would remind you, the path to wholeness isn't found by erasing the pain, but by reclaiming the parts of you that pain made you abandon. So now, dear soul, ask yourself quietly, honestly, what have I called normal? That was never love to begin with. And are you ready to return to yourself, to the whole of you? If this voice stirred something deep within you, write in the comments, I choose clarity over chaos. And know this, you are not awakening alone. You are simply awakening at last. Of all the truths we've explored together, one thread ties them all. You are not here to tolerate pain in the name of love. Carl Jung never asked us to demonize others, nor to glorify suffering. He asked us to become aware, to see what is. Because only when we see, truly see, can we choose differently. In your modern life, that means this. You must become a guardian of your emotional energy, not just at work, not just in romance, but in every space where your soul has been silently negotiating its worth. It means understanding that emotional manipulation is not care. That sarcasm, weaponized silence, and repeated betrayal are not just how they are. That a relationship, romantic, familial, or otherwise, that leaves you anxious, unseen, or small, is not one you must keep tending out of loyalty to your history. You owe your life more than endurance. You owe it integrity. And that begins by naming what is no longer aligned. In our hyper-connected world, it's easy to gaslight ourselves into thinking it's not that bad. Everyone deals with this. I can manage. But Jung would challenge that. He would ask, why are you managing instead of thriving? You were not born to become what others need. You were born to remember who you truly are. Not through rebellion, not through perfection, but through integration. That means looking at your shadow without shame, owning your pain without letting it define you, and walking away from anything that confuses emotional starvation with love. Start small. Reflect on one area of your life where you constantly shrink yourself. Journal the patterns that exhaust you. Practice silence not as punishment, but as sanctuary. Give yourself permission to ask, what would honoring myself look like today? This is not selfish, this is spiritual hygiene. As Jung said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. So, choose. Choose clarity over confusion. Choose boundaries over burnout. Choose depth over comfort. Choose truth, even if it means standing alone. Because here's what no one tells you. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop attracting those who do. Your life begins to reorganize around your truth, not your wounds, not your fear, not your past. And that, my friend, is how you reclaim your soul, in the middle of a world that keeps asking you to give it away. If this message reached you, write in the comments, I choose clarity over chaos. Then take a breath and carry this truth with you. You were never too much. You were simply misread by those who couldn't read themselves. But now, you see, and that is the beginning of everything. If this message spoke to something quiet but true inside you, and you'd like to walk this journey with others who feel the same, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but as a small way of saying, yes, this is the kind of truth I want more of. Your presence here matters more than you know, and your support helps us keep creating content that honors the soul, not just the noise of the world. Thank you for being here. Truly.